Good evening, everyone. We're about to get started in about 1 minute.
Aubrey, can you hear me?
I can.
Good. A little awkward moment before we
Yeah,
start.
we are live though, so I'm going to go ahead and mute you, and you can unmute when we get back your way.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. Jason, can you just give me a nod that sound is okay and we're good to go? All right. We're going to go ahead and get started with the virtual town hall for the RTA Transit System Plan. My name is Abra Nusser, and I am with Kimley Horn. I'll be moderating tonight's town hall, including the question and answer portion of our presentation, or after the presentation, rather. Before we begin, we're going to do a few housekeeping items just to review. At rtamoves.com, the new project website, you can find the PDF of the slides for tonight's presentation. You can find a question or comment form if you think of a question or comment after tonight's town hall. And we'll also provide the questions and answers to tonight's meeting up there over the next week or so. And tomorrow we will post a recording of this presentation. So again, that's at rtamoves.com. It looks like we are rapidly gathering attendees, and I know that we do have attendees as well live on the RTA's Facebook live stream, so you're welcome to join that. So thank you to all of you and also all of our partners on the line. Just some additional Zoom functions here. I'm sorry, hold on one second. Oh, okay. So please note that the chat and raise hand functions will not be utilized. This is a Zoom webinar, so it's a little bit different than maybe some of the Zoom meetings you've attended personally or at work. So webinars are used when we expect a lot of attendees, and it's just to provide a more non-distracted experience. For a more interactive experience with live chat with other participants, you can feel free to visit the RTA Facebook page, and you can see the live stream there of the same event. The Q&A button can be found at the bottom of your screen as indicated on the slide. Please feel free to send questions or comments throughout tonight's presentation, and then we'll conduct a live Q&A after the presentation with our panel for tonight's event. We want to make you aware that due to time constraints, we may not answer every question tonight, but we will post all the questions and answers within the next week or so at rtamoves.com. So with that, let's get started. This is the agenda for tonight. We're going to go through just a little bit of RTA context, a recap of the January town hall, the draft transit system plan, including the goals and the potential regional transit corridors, the next steps, and then that panel Q&A. And I'd like to introduce now Governor Brad Henry, who's also the chairman of the RTA Board of Directors.
Well, thank you, Aubrey. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Great, thank you. Good evening and welcome to everyone. I'm Brad Henry, Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority of Central Oklahoma, or RTA. Thank you for taking time this evening to join our second town hall meeting to discuss RTA's transit system plan. I'd also like to take just a brief moment to acknowledge and thank my esteemed colleagues from the board who are viewing tonight's meeting in their capacity as members of the public. Back in January, it was exciting to see the impressive turnout and participation at our first town hall, and we're excited to keep that momentum going. Tonight, as you've heard, we will continue to answer some of the questions we've received since our first town hall, and we'll recap the history of the RTA and bring you up to speed on our progress, specifically as it relates to the work being done by our consultant, Kimley Horn, on the transit system plan. You might note that we've extended the time for tonight's meeting so we can have plenty of time for Q&A with our panelists after the presentation. We're really looking forward to hearing from you on the components of the transit system plan, and especially including the regional corridors. Also, as has been mentioned, we're very excited to have launched rtamoves.org, which will be the project website for this study. So I hope you'll check it out and try all of the interactive features. Again, thank you for taking time to be here tonight, and we're looking forward to a great meeting. I'll turn it back over to Abra to introduce our panelists. Back to you.
Thank you, Governor. So here's our panel for this evening. We've got Jason Fairbrush with the RTA. He's the interim executive director. Catherine Holmes of Holmes and Associates, who's the RTA owners rep, and then Liz Scanlon, who is the project manager, and she is with Kimley Horn. So with that, we will get started and start with Jason.
All right, thanks, Abra. Well, welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. So I think I'm covering the RTA context section of our meeting if you're following along on your agenda. And, I'm really glad that we added this to tonight's meeting because we received some several questions, during our last town hall, just kind of about, well, what is the RTA? What's the background? How did the organization come to being? So I'm going to try to answer those questions tonight and hopefully really give anybody that's new to the RTA really a sense of kind of where we've come from and where we are. And I think really to get started might be helpful to really kind of give you the lay of the land as far as how transit is currently being delivered within central Oklahoma. And so right now, transit is being delivered through Embark, which provides primarily bus transit, but also streetcar service and some paratransit transportation services, primarily within Oklahoma City, but also contracts with the city of Norman, city of Midwest City, and Oklahoma County to provide transit service in those areas. And then the city of Edmond, of course, an RTA member city, they provide transit service through CityLink. And then the city of Norman, they have really took some steps in managing transit within their community, primarily through a contracted agreement with Embark to provide that service. So the point is, right now we're providing transit service within central Oklahoma. I think between the providers, we've been very effective in doing that, but we haven't really had a regional type approach until now. And that's really what the RTA brings to the table. It's because it's as the slide says, it's a regional independent government agency that's really charged with planning, funding, constructing transit within the central Oklahoma region. So whereas transit is currently being provided by these providers that are really kind of subsets of member cities, what's important, I think, for people to understand is that the RTA, again, is a regional independent government entity. So as far as the RTA and how we got here, although the RTA is new on paper, if you will, being officially formed in 2019, there's a lot of work, a lot of effort that went into getting us to this point. And I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I do think it's important to kind of share a little bit of the history. And really, while I'm at it, really give a nod and acknowledgement to the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments and some of the efforts they led back in the early 2000s of just getting these cities and political leaders together to talk about regional transit for our area. And that was all through what we now know as the Regional Transit Dialogue. Those participating members of the Regional Transit Dialogue, they were really instrumental, along with ACOG, in launching the Commuter Corridor Study. And that Commuter Corridor Study was kind of the very first look at some of the corridors that are included in the plan that's going to be presented tonight. Also, that Regional Transit Dialogue Group and ACOG and other stakeholders were instrumental in passing some legislation. And you can see it on the timeline there on the slide. This was House Bill 2480, which really, just to summarize, basically allowed for a district such as the Regional Transit Authority to be an independent district, if you will, with the ability to basically receive dedicated funding through sales tax if you know that vote were to be approved by members within the district. So that was a big key piece of legislation that really had that legislation not been in place, the Regional Transit Authority wouldn't likely be here today. So from the passage of that legislation, as you can see in 2015, a memorandum of understanding between the 6 participating cities was signed. In 2017 and 18, the trust indenture, and if you will, was developed. And then, of course, as I mentioned, in 2019, the RTA came into existence through the historical signing of the 6 participating cities. And of course, the 6 participating cities are represented by our board members. And I think the next slide here that we have will give us a look at who our board members are. And here we go. So the RTA board is actually comprised of 7 board members. 2 of those board members represent Oklahoma City, and then each of the 5 remaining cities have 1 member designated to the board. So you all have met our chairman, Brad Henry. Governor Henry represents the city of Oklahoma City. Marion Hutchinson is the vice chairman for the RTA board of directors. He represents the city of Norman. And of course, if you follow transit in our community at all, you know how involved Mr. Hutchinson has been. James Boggs is the RTA treasurer representing the city of Edmond. And then, of course, we have Mary Malone, who is the RTA secretary, also representing the city of Oklahoma City. And you'll get to hear from her at the end of tonight's meeting. And then, of course, we have Steve Eady from the city of Moore. We have Mr. Don Vick representing Del City, and then Aaron Budd representing the city of Midwest City. So this is the board of directors that makes up that independent government entity that is the RTA. So I hope that background and kind of an explanation of who the RTA is and how it kind of differs from existing independent transit providers. I really hope that was helpful for the participants tonight. So. All right, Catherine, I think we're turning it over to you at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, Jason. So my name is Catherine Holmes, and I am a consultant to the RTA with Holmes and Associates. And I was initially hired by the RTA task force through ACOG, after the Regional Transit Dialogue and the signing of the MOU and the 6 cities that funded the effort to stand up a regional transportation authority. So we spent several years with ACOG, working very, very closely with ACOG and the members of the task force to define what the RTA governance structure would look like. And we may touch on that a little bit later. But for now, I just want to sort of reiterate, as Jason mentioned, that the Central Oklahoma region has been studying adding rail to its public transportation network for many, many years. The prior studies have been sponsored by COPTA. The Fixed Guideway study was done in 2005, and the sponsor of that was the Central Oklahoma Transportation and Parking Authority. And then ACOG sponsored the Intermodal Hub study in 2011, which identified the critical importance of preserving the Santa Fe station to the region to bring all transportation modes together in Central Oklahoma. And then, as Jason mentioned, the Commuter Corridor study in 2015. Those studies have been closely coordinated with ODOT, the DOT in the state of Oklahoma, as well as FTA, which is our federal partner, the Federal Transit Administration. So the RTA, now that it is an independent agency, will continue to work closely in partnership with all of these stakeholders, both the Federal Transit Administration, ODOT, ACOG, at the regional level, and the existing operators like Embark throughout the next stages of work. So now that RTA has been established, we will embark on a multi-year process to bring expanded transit services to the region. And this slide shows you where we are, which is at the very beginning of this multi-year process. You can see that we are currently in the system planning stage, which Liz Scanlon will talk more about shortly. The transit system plan step is important in order to meet requirements for FTA projects to be eligible for federal funding in the future. After the transit system plan is in place, the RTA will embark on several steps to further define the potential corridors, including the examination of stations, routes, environmental review, and preliminary hearing. So this will be a deep dive to refresh earlier assumptions and results of earlier studies, and also look at some new potential corridors that may come out of the transit system plan in the next coming weeks. But ultimately, the RTA will seek a federal capital investment grant, which will lead to construction operations. The federal grant is a competitive process, and every step that we're taking in the coming months and years is done with an eye towards making sure that the RTA will be very competitive when we get to the federal grant process, and including getting this transit system plan in place, which, as I mentioned, was one of the first necessary steps. But throughout this process, we will continue to collaborate at all levels to ensure the RTA is meeting all project requirements and that the new transit system is well connected within each community. Liz?
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Catherine. All right, I'm going to go ahead and review our part of the technical presentation tonight. First, we're going to start with a quick recap of our January town hall. Some of you out there may have attended. We held the town hall meeting on January 28th. We had great attendance on the Zoom webinar, and we also simulcast with the Facebook page, and we had over 800 views through that venue. Similar to tonight's meeting, we advertised through multiple mediums, and we received almost 60 questions as part of that town hall meeting in January. So in terms of the topics that we covered, January was really an introduction to the upcoming transit system plan, including goals and potential corridors. The RTA, we did respond to all of the questions that we received in January, and just want to make sure that everyone out there is aware that those materials are posted to the RTA's website, including a full recording of the Zoom meeting. So if you didn't get a chance to see it, you're welcome to go check it out. And we also have posted the written responses to the questions. So we're very pleased with our engagement in January. So next, let's talk about the topic tonight, which is the transit system plan. This is the first step to the RTA bringing expanded high capacity transit into the region. Transit system plans are done across the country by transit agencies, really to establish a vision for the transit network to be implemented over time, say over a number of years. It really sets a big picture goal on how the region will grow and how those projects in the region, those transit projects, will align with the goals of the community. So for the RTA, we are not starting from scratch, but we are leveraging quite a bit of the work that came before us. Catherine mentioned all of the past studies, as well as the feedback that we have received from the community. One important component of these types of plans is that they are required in order to be eligible for federal funding, which Catherine just mentioned. The federal government wants to ensure that transit agencies have a system-wide plan and that those plans are included and conform with the broader regional transportation plan, which for us is prepared by ACOG. So we expect that the board of directors will consider the plan for adoption in April and then would forward that plan to ACOG for its consideration to be included in the Central Oklahoma Regional Plan, which I believe is called Encompass 2045. So this is just a very important step to ensure that all of the RTA projects going forward are eligible for federal monies. So let's take a look at draft goals as part of the transit system plan. So goals establish a framework for the plan, and they're usually broad and long-term focused. This is an important framework for the RTA to work from in both the immediate future and over the coming years. The goals will also guide our planning process and provide direction for the region to accomplish transit initiatives that, when combined, result in a cohesive, efficient transit network. So stepping through each of these, when we look at mobility and connectivity as a goal, we're thinking about how to make it easier, faster, and more reliable to get people from point A to point B across the region. For equity and accessibility, it's really about putting people first, right? How can we make the transit system safe and convenient for everyone to use? Economic and workforce development is a goal that would work toward utilizing these new increased transit connections and the accessibility that we've added to bring value and prosperity into the region. And last but certainly not least, sustainability and viability would pursue solutions that are financially responsible and sort of have the most bang for our buck while constructing, operating, and maintaining regional transit that is responsible and built to last. So these draft goals are part of the transit system plan. They're also listed on the rtamoves.com website, and we're looking forward to receiving your input and thoughts and ideas around these goals. So before we dive into looking at the regional corridors, I wanted to recap quickly the types of transit that we're thinking and talking about. So throughout Central Oklahoma, most of you are familiar with the Embark fixed route bus service, the fixed route bus services, as well as the OKC streetcar in downtown. So when we talk about high capacity transit vehicles, we're speaking really to modes that can operate more frequently, that carry quite a lot of people and move across greater distances in the region. And so these types of lines connect where people live to where they want to go for work, entertainment, school, to the airport, or to tinker. And in particular, we're talking about the three items there you see on the slides: bus rapid transit, light rail, and commuter rail. So bus rapid transit usually has, it's a bus, but it usually has dedicated lanes, some kind of transit priority in the lanes. They have stations and ticket vending, and typically a branded vehicle. So these tend to be able to run more efficiently and more frequently and faster than the typical fixed route service. Light rail and commuter rail, on the other hand, are trains that operate typically in dedicated transit ways. They have stations that are spaced out across the cities and the regions, and they operate more frequently, carry more people. And so as part of our overall planning process, we are going to be examining these transit options that can be in a regional nature and connect the destinations differently. We'll talk more about that. So as we think about the RTA's transit system plan, we want to think a little bit about how it interconnects with the existing bus system and the streetcar system, right? And pairing the RTA's future services with the current bus services will be really important. These connections will expand the reach of the RTA system and ensure improved access across the region. And you can see on this map where we're showing where buses are already providing service within the region currently. It's just sort of a basic framework. Now, there are also other partners, such as Embark, who are doing projects that will further increase transit connectivity. You can see on this map where Embark is designing the Northwest Bus Rapid Transit project there from downtown along the Northwest Expressway. But there are also transit initiatives contemplated under MAPS 4 for bus rapid transit, serving the Adventure District northeast of downtown and also to points south of downtown. So now that we've sort of discussed the local services and initiatives, we can talk a little bit more about how we can build on the strong transit network to better connect the entire region. As we noted earlier in the presentation, the RTA's vision is to implement high capacity transit across central Oklahoma. So after the transit system plan is in place, we would be examining how all of these routes and all these types of transit in much more detail and how they work together. So this map is the culmination of many years of the regional transit dialogue that Jason mentioned, multiple planning studies that have come before us, as well as significant public engagement through the past, through our town hall in January, and the board's vision, the RTA board's vision for the region. This is the draft system plan that is up for consideration and shows you the potential regional corridors. These corridors can connect jobs and homes to the major activity centers in the region or the major areas people want to travel to, where you can see on the map connecting to the airport, to Tinker, to the different universities and the medical campuses, etc. So specifically, these corridors include a north-south alignment from Edmond to Norman, a connection to the east connecting to Tinker, which of course we know is the largest employer in the state, a connection to the airport, which is an important regional gateway, right, for travelers, and to the west of downtown, which is seeing quite a lot of residential growth. These corridors help to increase travel choices for how we move about the region to live, work, and play. And these new corridors would be, of course, supported by the transit network that already exists that I showed you. We expect that these could be implemented over a period of time, and this map represents a vision for how we can grow the transportation system overall. And finally, this map gives you a sense of how the regional corridors and the local services can relate and support one another. And we will be studying the details of all of this in further detail as we go forward. After the RTA board adopts the plan, we have quite a bit of work ahead of us. So let's talk a little bit about next steps. That sort of concludes the main presentation, but let's talk about what's coming up. So Governor Henry mentioned, and we're excited to launch the rtamoves.com, our project website, which is now available. This site will grow and evolve as our planning work advances. But right now we have a 3-step series of collaboration tools for you for the transit system plan. You can go in, you can rank the corridors if you like that I just talked through. We're really excited for you to participate in the ideas wall, where you can talk to us about how to implement the goals, where you can simply submit your questions or your comments. So we hope you check it out. And we also wanted to give you a quick snapshot on the next slide. Might be a little lag. This is the ideas wall where you can share with us your ideas for how to implement the goals of the plan. There's an awesome discussion already occurring. This is intended to help us brainstorm and receive feedback. It's super fun, and we really encourage your participation in this. So please don't be afraid to jump in and share your thoughts or ideas. You can like something someone already posted. You can also add to someone else's discussion threads. Go in there and check it out. We're really excited to have you participate with us. And again, this is on the rtamoves.com website. And so finally, just a quick look ahead. We will be collecting community feedback through April 14th on the rtamoves.com website on the plan. What we will do is prepare and submit the draft system plan, including community feedback, to the board of directors for their consideration. This will be presented at their April 21st meeting. At that time, we expect the board will talk about the corridors that they want to advance into the more detailed planning process, And we're also quite hopeful that the board will adopt the transit system plan at that meeting. After April, our project team would then go into the more detailed work. You're going to hear us talk about alternatives analysis, which is really the process by which we will be looking at the specific routes, the transit vehicle types, the types of stations and the station locations, and all of the detailed planning work that will come to flesh out more these corridors. And all along the way, we will be doing community engagement. So we encourage you to subscribe on the website if you'd like to stay informed and keep tabs on what's happening on the project. So with that, that concludes the main presentation. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Abra for the Q&A.
Thank you, Liz. Give me just a moment here. So thank you all for your attention. We are excited to talk with you about this very important planning work. So let's get started with the Q&A portion of our event. Just a couple of reminders here as we approach our Q&A. Please utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We've already received some questions, so we will get started with those. And if you think of something after the town hall, please feel free to head to the website and use that comment or question form. Also, just a reminder of our panelists. It looks like everybody's got their cameras back on, but Jason Fairbrush, Catherine Holmes, and Liz Scanlon, who you just heard from. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing, and we are going to transition to kind of a different format here. And let's see if we can get our views set, and we are going to bring up the questions for consideration. So I'm going to be providing the panel questions, and if we can just hold on one second. All right, it looks like we have one about kind of the different entities involved. And maybe Catherine, you can start us off with this one. How is the RTA different from ACOG, Embark, ODOT, etc.?
Okay, thanks, Abra. So the main difference between all of the transportation partners in the state of Oklahoma has to do with both the charge and mission of a particular agency and the geography that each agency is responsible for. So for example, ODOT is, of course, the Department of Transportation state agency in Oklahoma, and it's responsible for statewide transportation. ACOG is responsible for regional planning for central Oklahoma. The RTA is an implementing agency for regional transit in central Oklahoma. And all of these entities will collaborate together, including with the existing operators such as Embark, on the regional transit solutions that we're now starting to put some meat around, but which ACOG and others have been studying for many, many years. So all of these agencies are important. They all provide a slightly different role, but they all collaborate together. And we hope that together we will arrive at a regional solution that really fits the desire and needs of the community.
Thank you. Anybody have anything else to add? I guess I should wait. The second question that we have here, it looks like, which transit types are planned for which corridors? Liz, maybe you can start us off for that one.
Sure. So as you heard from me tonight, the important first step is to identify the corridors. And as I mentioned, we'll be embarking after April, after the board takes action on the draft plan, so setting the big vision of the corridors. We will then go in and study each of those corridors to select the specific alignment or where the transit will travel. Is it on the roadways? Is it in an existing right-of-way, a freight corridor, what have you? And so the detailed planning work will really kind of determine in detail what transit types, what corridors, where do the stations go, and then we would marry that with a funding plan and all the details around on how to move that corridor forward into the project development phase. Catherine or Jason, anything to add?
No, you just answered it so well. So here's the next one. And again, if you're looking to submit a question, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you are in the Zoom format. If you are on Facebook Live, feel free to put a question in the comments, and we have some lovely partners watching that for questions, and they can submit it in the Zoom for us to kind of incorporate into the queue here. So this one looks like it might be a good one for Jason to start with. How will these regional transit improvements be paid for?
Okay. Well, the short answer is a combination of federal funds and local dollars, right? Local contributions from the member cities. So that's the short answer. I think that's what everybody envisions. And really that's a smart way to do it, right? Is you set a project up for success, you get it accepted into the federal grant program, and then you're able to leverage those federal dollars along with local dollars. But you know, there is a lot to it, and we're going to see that whole process progress over the coming years. But you know, before you pay for any project, you got to start with good cost estimates, right? And so I know as part of the consultant's work and through the alternatives analysis, we're going to come up with some really solid cost estimates that we can take to the public and that we can take to the member cities. And so once you have those cost estimates, then of course, you know, that helps you prioritize, right? There's, you know, you can't do everything at once. So then you got to prioritize. And once you get those priorities in line, if you will, then I think the charge is to say, well, what is the most competitive? Again, going back to trying to be able to leverage dollars, leverage federal grant funds, what's going to compete the most? And so I really think that's, you know, that's the process in terms of how they're going to be paid for. I mean, it's got to be a strategic approach, but ultimately it will take local funding. Right. I mean, it's impossible to compete for federal grants if you don't have some type of local funding to back that up. And that's going to be a big decision for the region and the public and, you know, our voters. And we're well on our way to seeing what that looks like.
Thank you. Looks like this might be another one for Catherine to start us off with. Is the RTA considering buying right-of-way for a new rail or just using existing lines?
Well, that's going to depend on the results of the alternatives analysis. It'll depend on the mode and the alignment that's ultimately selected. Some of the early work, in particular the commuter corridor study, did come out with a locally preferred alternative that assumed that there would be commuter rail in the BNSF corridor. And so that is certainly something that is being brought forward, and depending on the results of the action of the board and the results of the alternatives analysis that Kimley Horn puts through, it's possible that a corridor would be considered for a commuter rail alignment. But whether that is purchased or just access rights are given under a long-term lease arrangement is, you know, something that will be the result of future discussions. There are a lot of issues that arise in either one of those ownership scenarios, and we would have to consider that with full discussions with BNSF as a partner. And we've had very good preliminary discussions with BNSF, but certainly no commitment has been made, and we will need to continue that process for several years probably before we come to a conclusion on what would be the most appropriate, both alignment and mode that will inform that issue.
maybe Catherine or Liz on this one first. Maybe Catherine. How are talks with BNSF and other railroads about their requirements to provide trackage rights for this new passenger rail? Have they provided capital improvement estimates?
There have been preliminary discussions at this point with BNSF. I have not had discussions with other either short line operators or I think there's Union Pacific has a line that it operates in the vicinity, and I haven't had discussions with other partners at this point. I have had preliminary discussions with BNSF, and we are very much in discussion about what their requirements would be that would allow the RTA to have access to operate within their corridor. But as I mentioned, it's dependent upon numerous other issues that we haven't yet embarked on because we have this other preliminary work to do. There, the capital improvement assumptions will result from the work that the Kimley Horn team is going to start doing now and over the next year. And so we really need, we are just sort of embarking on that phase of the work. We need to refine the alignment, we need to refine the mode choice, and that will drive the capital improvements that will be necessary. We will then have discussions if commuter rail in the BNSF corridor remains a viable alignment. We'll work closely with BNSF to run some operating scenarios and that will drive the capital improvements. And so all of that will happen over the next year or 18 months probably. But we haven't had that granular of a discussion with BNSF at this point. We've talked conceptually about what they require to allow access, and we're working towards some of the early requirements to make sure that we would be eligible if that comes out of the alternatives analysis itself.
Great, thank you. Catherine, I don't want to toss the ball to you, but maybe this is you to start as well. Will the corridors be limited to existing infrastructure, or will constructing new infrastructure be considered?
I think constructing new infrastructure will be considered in almost every corridor. Liz, do you see that differently?
No, I mean, just to the degree that stations or parking lots and park and rides, those types of improvements typically would accompany. So in terms of this, the whole package of investments would be, you know, we may have to treat traffic signals or grade crossings. So there would be a host of different things that would most likely occur depending on the corridor or the alignment and the route and what we need to do to make it safe and accessible for the community.
Okay. Looks like this one might be for Jason. We have received a comment about an additional alignment, maybe to the northwest portion of the city, in addition to the Northwest Expressway BRT. Maybe just kind of addressing that in general.
Okay. So in addition to the current BRT that's being designed and constructed?
It says in addition to, yeah.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can answer it this way. In that the Northwest BRT, as we're calling it, on the from the Embark side of operations, that corridor actually has its origins back in the 2005 fixed guideway study. It was identified as, you know, one of the corridors within the city that was really kind of prime for rapid transit, specifically bus rapid transit. And so that's really what we've been concentrating our efforts on over the past years, and are currently like right in the midst of designing that BRT, and will soon be, you know, in construction with opportunities to provide revenue service as early as 2023. So so thinking of like, well, okay, so what could we do in addition to that corridor? Well, again, going back to the 2005 fixed guideway study, the recommendation for that corridor was actually to take it all the way out Northwest Expressway to generally the Kilpatrick Turnpike area, right? And you can imagine the possibilities there when you think about park and rides. Park and rides were mentioned, right? Imagine having a parking ride out there, a park and ride intersecting with the turnpike. I mean, you talk about accessibility and some of the overall regional transit goals we're trying to accomplish. That'd be fantastic. Not to mention all the residential that's being constructed and is already there in that area. So I guess the answer is, yeah, we would love to see that corridor expand and really bring it to the full, fruition that was envisioned in that 2005 fixed guideway plan. So that's definitely a possibility. Right now, we're concentrating on the first phase of that, which basically takes us as far west as Meridian. But yeah, there's definitely opportunities to, I believe, expand that, and we should look at that. Thank you for the question or suggestion.
Thank you. Jason, maybe this one to you first.
Okay.
Is the RTA or its affiliates specifically attempting to collect public input from those populations that the eventual transit system will most affect? So talking about collecting public input.
Yeah. So, well, if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think, tonight's town hall is just, it's a perfect example of what, the RTA is trying to do. And that is, venues for the public from all the participating or member cities to be able to, chime in and contribute, give opinions, share ideas. So yeah, we are open and optimistic that we'll hear from all member cities. That's vitally important, I believe, to have a successful regional system, right? You want to hear from all the residents and all the participating cities. So one of the ways we're doing it, of course, is through these town halls. I believe, as Liz, Abra, maybe Catherine have also even mentioned, we plan to have future town halls and public engagement opportunities. I mean, who's to say what public engagement potential we may have a year from now, right? I mean, talk about some open houses and some workshops and those kinds of things. So those are, I believe, are on the horizon. But then we also have to give a lot of credit to our board members, right? I mean, they are the representative for the participating cities. And all you have to do is go to one of our meetings and you'll see how engaged our board members are. And you're going to hear from Mary Malone at the end of the meeting here, and she is actually the chair of our outreach committee. So we actually have a committee established specifically for outreach. And Catherine and Liz and others will tell you we've been on kind of a pretty heavy duty tour of cities and stakeholders, sharing what the RTA is doing and letting people know about these town halls and those kinds of things. So I know that's a lot of information, but that's a super important question, and I appreciate you letting me spend a little bit of time on it. So yes, public engagement, very important to our board.
Great. Thank you. So we are open for more questions. If anybody, just to remind all the participants, both on Zoom and Facebook Live, if you're on Zoom, just go ahead down to the Q&A function, and that's at the bottom of your screen, and you can submit a question there. If you are on Facebook Live, feel free to comment and we will get those into the queue. But otherwise, we will just stay on for a couple minutes here and chat transit.
So Abra, if we're out of questions, I mean, hey, this is the time. If anybody's right, I mean, throw us a question. I think we're ready.
Yeah, I mean, we're ready. We are ready for your questions.
Yeah. Back to the last question we had, the one thing I didn't mention was, I think some of what you shared in the housekeeping, but maybe it's a good reminder, is that, anybody can ask questions. I mean, it doesn't have to be tonight, right? So no. We've got our RTA Moves website ready to go. So send us those questions. And that's another way to engage just really on an ongoing basis, right? It doesn't have to be at a special event like this. You can engage with us anytime, and we try to answer those questions. So, one of the things that, unless we have more questions, you said we'll talk transit a little bit. I hope I don't get trouble for putting anybody on the spot here, but
I love
one of the
it.
things,
Here
one
we
of the
go.
things that occurred to me, when we got we received some of those great questions about, BNSF and negotiating with railroads and that kind of thing. I understand, and I've learned from Catherine really that in some situations, there's advantages to the railroad too, right? In some cases of, I guess maybe it could potentially increase their capacity, or so it's not just how are we going to fit this commuter rail in, right?
Yeah, I mean, done right, it works both ways, and it adds value to both partners. And so that's why it's so important to take the time to strike the right balance. I'll tell you that I have worked with a lot of railroads for public transits in a lot of different corridors, and everyone is different. They really are different. I'm informed by situations that have worked really well in Salt Lake City, for example, or other places where I've worked. But you really need to come into a community. You really need to get to know closely the host railroad and what its operating constraints are, because their corridors are different too, and the number of trains that they're carrying, whether it's a main line, and how many industry customers they have on the line. I mean, all of that is part of the mix, and figuring out what is the right strategy that will bring the most value to everybody involved is really what you try to do. There are lots of ways to do it. There's not just one way to do it. And I have had in my early conversations with BNSF, they're very clear about the way they prefer to approach their relationships with transit running in their corridors, and that's great. It's not the same way that other freights prefer it, but it's the way they prefer it, and that works. I mean, it doesn't, as I say, there are lots of ways to do it, and so coming up with an operating scenario that meets the public transit needs, guarantees some windows of time that they will get passenger priority during the commute hours, but making sure that this really important commercial partner, right, like gets their freight delivered on time and where they need to go as well. So it's striking the balance that we want to achieve.
I have a very exciting development. We have more questions. So maybe Catherine first on this one. How soon, or maybe Jason, maybe I'll just open it up. How
We work
soon
together
would
well.
Yeah. How soon would the board prioritize and select which corridors to work on first?
Okay, well, does that mean I need to answer?
You go.
All right. Well, I think obviously we've got a lot of work to do. We probably have a whole lot of work for the consultants to do to get in that position. But I think the next fiscal year, FY22, is, I think, really going to be telling in terms of, okay, what is the priority, and what corridor do we look at the hardest first? And that's primarily because FY22 is when I believe it was Catherine had mentioned, that's when the alternatives analysis kicks off, right? And that's kind of your deeper dive, your harder look at the corridors and what makes the most sense. So.
Great. Catherine, maybe this one you first. Will current transit operators merge into the RTA, or will they each continue separate operations?
So I think that's a great question. And again, there is no one way to do this. In some early work I did for the RTA task force, very early, like this was pretty much right out the chute in 2017, we looked at a number of different governance structures for a number of different transit systems across the country to try and help the task force figure out, well, what do we want our transit authority to look like? And one of the systems we studied was Phoenix. And the Phoenix system is actually a series of municipally run bus companies held together loosely by an overarching umbrella of a regional rail authority. And so that's one model. And then another model, the completely opposite model, would be, the Salt Lake City model, where all of the bus, it started off in the late 60s, were all separately owned municipal bus systems. They were all assumed, merged into the then newly created Utah Transit Authority, but it was a bus only company for a long time. We broke ground on the first light rail line in 1997. So, it formed as a bus company, initially operating regionally, and it was however many, 30 years until it broke ground on its first rail line. And so it now is one of the few systems that operates all modes, including it operates its own commute. It has commuter, its operators of the commuter rail system are employees of the UTA. They're not third-party engineers that are brought on from a third-party operator like a Herzog or someone. So it's really all over the map, and it's really very dependent on what the community wants, what the board prefers, so maybe Jason wants to opine on that.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Concur with everything you said, Catherine. There's lots of different models for that. I think the most important thing to focus on, though, is the customer experience, right? And however it shakes out, the customer, the individual needing the transportation trip, they don't want to have to deal with multiple entities, multiple passes, different fare sets. So whether, organizationally it's multiple entities or one, I think the real goal, at least initially, would be to make it seamless transportation. With our mobile devices now and the technology that is available to pay fares and do trip planning, it should really all be, at least from the customer experience, in my mind. This is just me speaking. I certainly wouldn't speak for the board, but I know customer service is definitely a priority for them. That's the way we would want it to be structured. And I think also, there's nothing that says the RTA wouldn't start off one way and over time transition to a different operating model, right? Because with any new entity, you're going to learn things, you're going to make changes. It may make sense to adopt and keep a Phoenix model, or it may quickly become evident, the Salt Lake model has advantages. But I think the priority initially is going to be just making sure the customer experience is one that our region can be proud of.
Great. This is another one, Catherine, kind of similar, but kind of different than one of the ones we started with a few minutes ago. But what is the order of prioritization for each of the corridors covered thus far?
The order of prioritization for
each of the corridors.
For development or study, or
maybe there's a distinction there that is relevant. But yeah, just in general. Well,
I think that to be clear, and Liz will want to add to this, but the current study will bring forward whatever corridors in some fashion, to some degree, what the corridors that are on the map that's adopted. Some corridors may be studied in more detail than others, but moving corridors forward on a map is a good place to start. But the ultimate prioritization of which one goes first in terms of which one will be put up for federal funding first, or which one, I think ultimately that's a board decision that will be informed by many, many factors that will be developed over the next, several months or longer. Liz?
Yeah, I think we'll take our cue in hopefully in April from the board on where they want us to focus our energy. Kimley Horn, our firm, has a scope and charge with the RTA to examine the corridors as directed. So we hope to help them have a conversation, the board have a conversation around which should move forward in which orders. And then ultimately, as Jason mentioned, maybe Jason, you'll want to chime on this. The community, the region, the board will continue to assess and evaluate depending on funding and depending on a lot of factors. Nothing is permanent, I don't think. So we can always course correct as we go forward. Jason, is that fair? Or just...
Yeah, I do think it's fair. And I think, also just to remind everyone of a statement that was made earlier about how, the board is focused on, building on the work that's already been done. Right. And we know we really have the north-south corridor and the corridor out to the east. There's already been some work done there. So in terms of prioritization, we might be able to move a little quicker on the analysis on those where some work has already been done than some of the others. But yeah, I agree totally. The board would make that decision on, which one moves forward first.
So, I want to add one other thing that we've had some conversations about, not thoroughly yet with the full board. Liz and I have talked about it. She and I are both familiar with this strategy. We both worked in Salt Lake City, where we employed this strategy in Salt Lake City, and there are strategies that we could, if it made sense to the board, to the community, to our funding partners like our local cities and the FTA, there are ways that we might be able to combine some resources and advance more than one priority at a time. And that's a really attractive way to see if there's a way we can put together what we call a program of projects and move more than one project at a time by combining them in a way that makes federal funding more attractive. And that's probably all I can say about it at this point. But I mean, it's like every option's on the table. And if we're able to leverage that to move out more than one at a time, and the board is and we can afford it, there are ways that we can make that happen as well.
Catherine, I think I know we've been on this question quite a while, but you said if we could afford it, and I think that's something that we talk about a lot, but it's worth reminding the public is that anything we really present to the FTA, I mean, it has to be a financially constrained or financially feasible plan, right? I mean,
Yeah.
We have to be able to show we can pay for it. So, we'd love to do, every corridor as soon as we can,
Right.
But we have to demonstrate to the FTA that we can afford to do it.
Yeah.
So, right.
And our own community stakeholders, right? I mean,
Yeah, right.
That's the bargain that you're making with your taxpayers, right? It's like, yeah, we're financially constrained. We're smart about how we're doing this. We're going to create a system that's efficient, and yeah, that's a really important bargain.
Great. They're rolling in now, guys. So maybe Liz first on this one. Will the plan contemplate starting with one mode with the goal to transitioning to another?
Oh, what an interesting question. So some out there that may have attended the January town hall, we did actually talk a little bit about that. We didn't tonight. It is possible to start with a bus rapid transit line and convert to a rail option in the future as ridership grows or as money becomes available. In some markets, some cities have taken their fixed route corridor where there's good fixed route bus service and invested in stations and dedicated lanes to create a bus rapid transit project, and then eventually convert it to a light rail or some kind of rail option. So that's definitely something we would be thinking about as we look in the more detailed planning work.
On my unmute there. Maybe Liz to start with this one, and maybe Jason later, I'm not sure. How accessible to people with disabilities PWD, will the eventual system be on opening day, with or without federal money?
Yeah, I will start, and certainly would love Jason to weigh in on this. I mean, projects are very typical and very much required to meet the design standards for the Americans with Disabilities Act. We notice that the goals statements include a specific target at accessibility, which means making this new transit system available and accessible for everyone, seniors, those with disabilities, young and old alike. So I would expect that the design would include transit accessible features for sure. Jason, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just concur really with what you said, Liz, and that, I mean, any transit project we build today, construct today, either locally or even if you look industry wide, I mean, it will be ADA accessible. I mean, it's a requirement. I think looking locally, we could look at the Oklahoma City streetcar system. It was recently constructed and met all ADA requirements. Now I understand, and I'm sensitive, there's a difference between meeting ADA or people with disabilities requirements versus actually making it a usable, useful system for people that need ADA accessibility. And so, I mean, with that said, we, the board, I know will be very sensitive to that. Really, I think the biggest challenge, and I think most of us realize this, is maybe not so much with the transit system that is being or will be constructed being ADA accessible, but it's really focusing on, all the potential connections to get to that newly constructed, right, ADA accessible transit system. I think that's really where the challenge lies. And I know that's at top of mind for all the communities that are participating. We're all, playing catch up in some of those areas. So, but again, I just would reiterate that it's certainly at top of mind for us as a consultant and staff support team. And I know for the board as well. It's a great question.
Well, Jason, let's start with you this time.
Okay.
So will the RTA be running whatever system is put in place or paying a third party? Also, when you say stations, would those be locally run or operated by RTA? And then they mentioned specifically the Santa Fe station.
Okay. All right.
So
So a 3-part question. You're giving me 3 of them there, Avril.
yeah.
But I'll try.
Let me give you the first part real quick.
No,
Will the RTA be running whatever
okay.
system?
Yeah. So, in meetings like this, I just so wish I had like the direct answer, right? Like, yes, definitely we're going to contract it out, or yes, definitely the RTA is running it. I really wish I could do that, but we don't know we don't know, right? I mean, that's part of the alternatives analysis, but not so much alternatives analysis, but it's really more that operations plan that we have to come up with, right? We'll take a very similar approach, I'm certain, to how we did with Oklahoma City streetcar. We'll weigh out the kind of the pros and cons of managing the transit service in-house versus finding a third-party contractor to do that. One of the things that we always have to think about here in Central Oklahoma is like, where can we get experienced people that have, operated rail systems before? Well, we haven't done a whole lot of that, right, in this region with commuter rail, so that makes it a little bit of a challenge. But what's interesting about sharing right-of-way, if you will, with existing railroads is there's a potential they may have a preference, right? They may have a preference who operates that system, and we would certainly want to be sensitive to that. So I think we've proven, at least locally, that we can provide service with both contracted and in-house operations, and we'll do an adequate and evaluation and come up with a recommendation for the board, and we'll see where we go. Again, I wish I had a direct answer, but it's something that's under evaluation. However, the one takeaway I think with commuter rail that's different from anything else we've done here in the city is that the railroads may have some influence or some preferences on that we'll have to consider.
For sure. I can promise you we'll have to consider that.
Okay, all right. And then, so stations, I would, again, the stations could be ran by RTA employees, if you will. I could see that more of an operating scenario than the railroads really wanting to be involved. Santa Fe, the Santa Fe Depot, the hub, Catherine, I believe, talked about earlier. Currently, as most of you know, that's actually a Oklahoma City owned facility. The Central Oklahoma Transportation Parking Authority manages it, if you will. There's a lot of players in there, including Amtrak. I don't see a reason why it couldn't fall under the RTA's purview through some type of lease agreement. It would make sense if we're going to, in my mind, it would make sense to have, one entity managing that facility with multiple modes.
Great. So maybe Jason, this one to you first again.
Okay.
Equity is a pillar of the draft system plan. Does the RTA intend to make choices that deliberately benefit populations in central Oklahoma that have been historically displaced, economically disadvantaged, or spatially segregated? So equity.
That's a very tough and that's a very sensitive question. I believe the board, I believe the transit system that's constructed is going to be proposed to go where really the alternatives analysis recommends it goes, because that's going to be based on factors that are likely to make the transit system the most successful, right? For a successful transit system, you want the accessibility, you have to have the ridership, you have to be able to demonstrate a cost benefit analysis. So in my mind, I don't see that being a deciding factor one way or another. I think ultimately you want to, put the transit system where it's going to stand the chance for the most success. But as mentioned, equality and accessibility to all is one of the pillars. I mean, it's one of the goals. So that will factor in the not only where it goes, but the mode. And then keep in mind too, as being part of the federal grant program, there are certain Title VI requirements, if you will, that the project will have to meet. And in order to meet those requirements, there's an entire additional level of public engagement that will need to go on. And as part of that program that the board will have, we will have to do our due diligence and make sure that there is no part of the population that is, say, for example, disparately, misplaced, or that there's any adverse effect on a low income or minority population. So those are factors. They're important factors, and we'll address those issues as they come along. Again, tough, sensitive question. I hope I did a good job answering it. If you have any additional follow-up on that, please don't hesitate to post that on the website. Thank you.
Yes, and for those of you just tuning in, or maybe just wanting to know, that website is rtamoves.com, and you can submit a question or comment using the question or comment form. But there's also really fun engagements up right now that we need your feedback on, that will really help things as we move forward. Another question here, maybe Catherine first on this one. Are there any plans to establish a citizens steering or advisory committee?
Yeah, so we haven't talked about that with the board yet, but certainly it is it is my experience that you always have a citizen advisory committee when you are, you know, at various points of engagement, but certainly as you, you know, progress even into operations. Whether that is an advisory committee limited to certain topics, such as, I mean, having an ADA committee, for example, is helpful and common, and can provide an important voice to make sure that we are considering all of the issues that were previously raised, that those issues are being brought to the board's attention. That's an important way that is frequently used to do that. So we haven't had that discussion with the board yet, but it's my expectation that when we get further into the process, that would be part of the process.
I know it's 7:45 Central iPhone time, but it's so exciting to answer these questions. Let's just answer a couple more. Is everybody willing?
Do it.
Okay.
All right. So Jason, maybe this one for you first. Is sales tax the only local funding option available to the RTA?
With the current legislation, yes.
That one's simple.
There you go. You had your yes and no question.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So maybe Catherine first on this one. Should cities continue to improve fixed route service until regional service is operating?
So that's a great question. I think it's really important, and I'm glad this question was asked. As Jason mentioned, and Director Malone and other members of the outreach committee and some of us have been going out and reaching out to the cities and reminding them of where the RTA is in the process and blah, blah, blah. As we have done that in some communities, we are learning that, you know, there's this, the city of Norman is undertaking a fixed guideway study and is looking at refreshing that and reorienting that. And we've had conversations about you know, the importance of us all sort of staying collaborative, just so we're in the know about who's doing what and how's that working out, and making sure they know what we're doing and what our timing is, and we know what they're doing. And, you know, we've had conversations about, oh gosh, did you know this? And that I think has been helpful and informed their decisions. And we do stay linked on that. I mean, my expectation is, yes, I think communities should continue to do their own system planning, but it's also my expectation that as we get closer to a rail option coming online, then the cities will want to reorient. I mean, you're going to need to have your fixed route system feed into your commuter rail stations, for example, if that's the mode choice that ends up, you know, if that's an operating segment. You know, it's not, it's going to be really important that your routes get realigned so that you are meeting headways of the train when it stops, so that your schedules are coordinated. And so I would expect that as we get closer, that notwithstanding the work that's being done now, it will be tweaked again before operations begin on a rail segment to line those things up.
Liz, maybe for you on this one. First, does the alternatives analysis study all corridors, or is an alternatives analysis conducted for each corridor?
So for each corridor, typically think of it as a deep dive. As we look at, say, the Edmond to Norman corridor through downtown, we would look at the specifics relative to that specific corridor in the alternatives analysis. So it'll examine the route, the mode or the vehicle, the station locations. We would eventually progress into some level of engineering and cost estimating, environmental reviews, right? Financial plan, all the requirements that FTA or federal or state funders would require, or local funding requires. So we do it on a corridor basis.
Sticking with you, maybe Liz first on this one. Are you thinking BRT or rail to the airport?
I don't know yet, because we will hopefully end up doing some alternatives analysis work to study what mode makes the most sense to serve the riders on that corridor. And Jason, maybe you can help me. I don't I don't off the top of my head remember the 2005 study if it contemplated a mode or not, but we would look at both and the alignment and which alignment pairs best with the transit type, if that makes sense. So we would be examining all of that.
Yeah, and the 2005 fixed guideway study contemplated a bus rapid transit,
That's what
but you know, I think you know, obviously communities changed since then, without a doubt. But again, earlier comments I think, Liz, that you had shared was there's opportunities for some of these corridors, right, to perhaps start as one mode
right.
and transform into a different mode, right,
Right.
as ridership grows. And so my takeaway is if there are some of these corridors that are identified as BRT, that's great. It's rapid transit and it's got permanency beyond what we see in a fixed route service. But it doesn't mean that it's not eventually going to be a rail-based system either, or a rail-based corridor either. It doesn't preclude it in
Right.
most cases, I would say.
So at this point, what is the biggest thing we see moving forward with this project? What maybe is the biggest obstacle or challenge that we're going to face moving forward on the horizon? And this is to maybe everyone.
Everybody?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So
Quick, lightning round.
besides
Yeah,
paying
lightning
for
round.
it, do we just take paying for it off the table?
Paying for it. I
Because
mean,
you know,
that's
I mean, that's
relevant.
always a big one.
Okay. I mean, let's just call it that.
Yeah. Well,
These things are, yeah.
I mean, to me, I think definitely funding, and when we know that we got to figure out the funding scenario. But you know, I'm really glad we have Catherine as part of our team, because I think negotiations with the railroad are another really big, I wouldn't say obstacle, you know, but it's going to take a big time commitment and a lot of expertise. And you know, Catherine's done this in Salt Lake and you know, numerous other places. So so we've got the right people in place for that, certainly.
I think it's also
Two things come to mind.
Yeah, I think it's also just my experience is it does take time for corridors to develop and for us to go through all the steps. And I know that in past projects, it gets frustrating for the community. Like, why is it taking so long? So sometimes it's just not an obstacle at all. It's just challenging to help the whole community understand what we're doing. And we will work so hard to make sure that we're communicating, but it does take time. And sometimes that becomes frustrating for the community to excitement to ride the new train. And Catherine will remember when we worked in Salt Lake on the first commuter rail, you know, we have to do testing when we bring on a new system, and we were in testing for many months, and the public was going kind of out of their minds about, when are you opening it? We want to ride the train. So I think sometimes it's just the stamina and the patience, and bear with us while we work through the process that sometimes takes quite a long time.
I'm going to add to that. I mean, to this conversation, I actually think that one of the real challenges is it's also one of the really satisfying things, but it's getting your timing right and pulling together the political will from multiple communities across a region at the same time, like orchestrating it, like, so that everybody stays on board and you're kind of marshaling it along and your timing is right, and you've got a vote and a referendum passes, and you've got your federal funding lined up, and pulling all that together, it really, to me, is one of the most exciting parts of the work that we do. It's really hard. It's really hard to have it all kind of happen to, you know, when it's supposed to happen. So that's our goal, right? That's what we're here to do.
And what better note to end the Q&A than that? So we definitely don't want to go too far past our time here. So with that, we are going to close Q&A. If we did not get to your question, just please know that we will try to, we will be posting those questions and answers on the website. RTA moves over the next week or so. And I'm going to start sharing the screen again real quick and get us going. Liz, can you see the closing slide? Great, thank you. So just a couple of reminders. Go to rtamoves.com for the following: a presentation recording, which we will be posting tomorrow, and then the comment or question form if you have thought of something later that you'd like to ask the project team, and also some fun collaboration up there on rtamoves.com. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Director Malone, who is the RTA Board of Directors Secretary and also Chair of the Outreach Committee.
Thank you so much, Abra. And I want to start by thanking Jason, Catherine, and Liz for a really engaging Q&A session and for your presentations earlier. I am 100% comfortable speaking on behalf of the RTA board by saying how fortunate we are to have all of you on our team. Your level of expertise and your dedication is just incredible, and we appreciate you. We hope that everyone involved this evening learned a lot, and we really do want to thank you for attending. It is really important to all of us on the board that we are open and transparent with our work, and we very much value your input. We will take all of the feedback we've received and that we continue to receive into account as the board considers the transit system plan for adoption in April. As a reminder, you've heard this already, but we have an outreach committee of the board absolutely as a mechanism to make sure that we are regularly communicating with our partners and hearing from our key stakeholders. So we want to hear from you. In fact, we've even created a mobile meeting kit so that members of the board can actually come and speak to your community organizations about our work. So if you have civic groups or associations that you think would like to hear more about the RTA, please reach out to your member city board representative or to any of us, and we will be happy to accommodate that, and we look forward to that engagement. All of this has been mentioned a number of times, but please go check out the website, RTA Moves, which has so many great interactive tools for you to share your thoughts with us. And that's an easy way just to pop on anytime something is on your mind and add that to one of our interactive boards. Thank you again, all of you, for being here this evening. And please know that you are also welcome to our board meetings. Every board meeting is a public meeting. Our next one is April the 21st, so hope you'll tune into that. We are all very excited about the work that we've done, and even more excited about the work that we have ahead of us. This is going to be a game changer for Central Oklahoma, and I can again speak on behalf of the board. We are very committed to seeing this through and making this project a reality for our region and for our state. Thank you again for being here. Everyone, please be safe and have a great evening, and we will look forward to engaging with you very soon. We'll go ahead and end the Zoom meeting now. See you next time. Bye-bye.